Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about bringing peace into your relationship. One of the more challenging aspects of any relationship is dealing with conflict, and it's something that a lot of us tend to avoid because we have certainly negative experiences with conflict in and of itself. It seems to be unpleasant, and it could leave one or both feeling unfulfilled because obviously there's some sort of disappointment or disagreement that goes along with it. But what oftentimes is missing is the opportunity to take the conflict and build a bridge with it. Now, this is obviously a philosophical point of view, and I'm going to expand on that because when conflict generally happens, there's the disappointment around something that's not working. And for a lot of people, that feeling results in not just the disappointment, but how they react to it. That there's sort of this doomsday cloud that comes over the situation, and what it evolves into is a big emotional experience, and that can be fairly unpleasant. But cooler heads prevail, and if you live life long enough, you realize that things, particularly with conflict, they rise and fall with the situation. Every day is an opportunity to have a new day. And we don't necessarily have to bring those things into the next day. I mean, if it's something that is going to need time to resolve, but understanding that life actually does this all the time. It's not always happy. I know we look to achieve that, but it isn't always that. We have to work towards that. And it does seem at times that we're always dealing with the conflict. But most relationships are going to have that, and it's just part of life. So seeing it as something that you have to learn how to deal with and master is actually a good tool for life. Now, when it happens in relationships, what we tend to fear is that this is the beginning of the end. And some people just don't know how to deal with conflict. They see it as this is the end. It's a doomsday sort of situation. And what we have to learn to do is know that we can get through it. Good times are ahead. And learning that there are certain individuals who are good at solving problems. And those are individuals who we can aspire to be around because they can teach us a lot about dealing with issues. That sometimes there are things that are beyond our skill set. We can get help, we can and get advice, whether it's from another person, whether it's reading material, or whether it's maybe observing others in motion and dealing with conflicts. One of my favorite people to watch deal with conflict are individuals like Deepak Chopra, Barack Obama. He's another very skilled orator, and he's a very positive individual. Another person, Dr. Wayne Dyer. He's another person who has shared. Now, all of these individuals that I have either seen on television, read a book, or watched them in situations where they're dealing with people. And the nice thing about it is all of these individuals are positive people. Now, you have to start with a mindset that you want to understand the scope of the problem so that you can begin to deal with it. And sometimes the idea of dealing with the problem is breaking it down into specific modules or specifically, because it may have lots of layers to it. So I'm talking about it philosophically, but I think you know where I'm going with this. And it's when you're dealing with someone, a significant other, in having the confidence that you are going to get through the problem and we're going to be okay. That's an important first step. So being reassuring to your significant other or to the person that you're having a conflict with that we can resolve the problem is a good first step, because it sort of helps de-escalate the tension or the intensity around what brought this to the attention in the first place. And in my own self, I look at that as a good sign. It looks like a situation that we both want resolved that's going to have a favorable outcome. What tends to be the most fearful thing for me, and I can tell you this from personal experience, obviously, is when I get surprised with something, and let's say it's conflict or a situation that's kind of heated, and I can remember this when, having a breakup in a relationship. It seemed like on the other end, she had already made up her mind about what she was going to do, and I didn't have any say in it. Now that for me created a situation that was unworkable. I mean, I'm not able to offer any choices. I'm not given a choice. And when in situations like that, that seems to be the most desperate, because now you're not able to give any input. And let me sidebar here. In a situation like that, you really don't necessarily have a lot of choices, because if the other person isn't willing to compromise, then you're kind of just left with the situation and you have to deal with it. Or in this case of mine, in the breakup, I had to deal with it. I had to be in the reality of, okay, I no longer have this person and I'm going to be in a relationship with, and that's the fact. And getting to the place of being able to deal with that was something of my own life skills, and dealing with the disappointment and maybe turning the clock back and looking at the situations that led to the end. Okay. I will pick that subject up in a bit, but going back to where I'd left off, and how when you have situations that seem like they are dire, being positive, giving your partner the information that we're going to work through this, that tends to lighten the mood. And then you begin to talk about it. You begin to offer whatever solutions may resolve the problem. And sometimes, again, you have to take them in steps. You have to take baby steps with this stuff, because there may be more than one answer. But those are important ideas to keep in mind when you're trying to bring peace to your relationship. Because when you're partners, things affect both of you. And that's a very important thing to remember. Making decisions all on your own, for both of you, that's called making a unilateral decision. That may not be the best if you both haven't decided that that's the way to conduct the relationship. We all have roles in our relationships, and those are the kind of things that you're constantly working out. But I always believe in bringing attention to the situation, sharing your idea or solution with your partner, and then going forward with it. And when you both feel like you have an input in the situation, then you both have buy-in, then it tends to move forward. It's like one can pull and one can push. As long as you're going the same direction, you'll be all right. But if you're going opposite directions, then this thing is not going to work. And that's and again, that's an important distinction to make. Once you both have buy-in, then you should feel good about the problem-solving aspect and go on to the next step. And then you monitor it. You see, that's a good thing. That's what teams do. It's part of the relationship building. It's a very positive thing. Where the breakdown happens in these situations is you have people who are afraid to communicate, and they feel like they have to hide the problem and do it all on their own. And that causes a lot of stress. And if you're in a partnership, your partner can probably sense that there's something going on. And they may even ask you, say, hey, you're seeming to be a little tense. You are not really communicating a lot right now. You seem like there's something going on. So your partner can generally read these things, and you might just have to own up to it. And I suggest that you do, to take some of the pressure off. And, when you're doing that, it's really helpful that you let your partner know that they are important. This is why you're talking to them. Because I can share, and I've been guilty of this, when you're trying to keep secrets, when you're trying to solve the problem all on your own, then you sort of have that guilt thing that's operating in the background. Because you're trying to hide something, and you just want to solve it all on your own, and you don't necessarily have the best outcome. And it's amazing that if you're able to share what's really going on for you, and you're allowing your partner to kind of come through, step up, be part of the solution, you might be amazed at what your partner is capable of doing. And hopefully you don't feel like they're going to condemn you for, if there's a mistake or something like that. I think it's great when you allow them to have input, because when they're trying to be part of the solution, then you learn you actually have an ally. Again, that's good for the relationship. So I'm going to take a short break, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other strategies. Stay tuned.
Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything with
Mariano
and Pauline.
Hashtag Pauliano. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media, from Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and on this episode, I am talking about bringing peace to your relationship. When I started out, I was talking about some of the strategies and dealing with conflict, some of the problem-solving things, because it's evidently, because we're humans, there's always going to be a problem somewhere around the corner, and dealing with it is obviously something we need to learn how to do. Some of us don't do it very well. I've certainly had my challenges with it, and I've had to learn many, many times the same lesson over and over. And some of what I'm sharing with you has to do with confronting the problem itself. But when you have a partner, you definitely want to share with them that there is a situation that's going on, because you obviously want to have this thing end well. And one of the things that happens to destroy relationships is when you have problems but you don't admit it, because sometimes these things get way out of hand. They lose they're not contained. Your partner finds out about it. And if, in particular, if it's something that affects them, it's pretty important that they know about it. And what I was sharing was, there's obviously fears around talking about things that have some sort of conflict element to it, because there could be the rejection that goes on involved in that, and that's personal to you. You might feel rejected. You might get blamed for the problem. So on and so forth. And I can even talk about that from a very personal experience of my own. But it's, how to acknowledge that there's a problem and being positive, share with your partner that, we're in this together and we will get through it. And, it's important to check in with your partner. Say, hey, are we still on task with this? How are we doing? Because some things can be dealt with relatively simply, and it's about acknowledging it, and we come together on it and solve it. Some things may be a little more complex, whether it's financial issues, whether it's medical or health or something like that. These things certainly require more of a team approach, but that's the key to problem solving, is when you have a partner, that's part of why they're there. And to learn to rely on that. And the positive part of that is when you learn that you really can depend on someone. And that's one of those things in life that we're always looking for, is some sort of stability. And I think we're used to people letting us down. And that's one of the reasons why we oftentimes don't share. And I can share that from a personal experience. I used to be very secretive because I was more afraid of sharing my problem and then being let down. And that taught me something about my own life. There were people that I brought into my life to be partners who were not very stable in their own. And they were kind of looking to me to prop them up. And when the situation would turn around where I needed support, they were never there. That taught me a great deal about how I make choices. And I used to live to go from situation to situation like that. Not that I was living for drama, because if you really look, when I really looked at my life and saw it, I never really had problems per se. My problems were never so big that I couldn't solve them, which is probably why I had so much time to be involved in other people's lives. But what I saw myself doing is being more invested in someone else than they were in me. And the good and the available people for me would never show up because I did not give them an opportunity to do that. So if you see yourself in this kind of situation, then it's probably one of those times when you need to look in the mirror and try to find out why that is. And certainly me inserting myself into someone else's life gave me a lot of practice at problem solving for someone else. But there and again, I probably didn't need it because I was already good at that. And then turning the focus around onto myself and solving my own problems, which, again, like I say, were not very big, because I've been fortunate. I have not had extended situations like some people have with the financial issues or with health problems or things like that. And I'm very fortunate to have gone through the situations and have lived through them. Other people, not so much. And they seem to create situations in which time and time again, they keep bumping their head. And when you do that, then again, you have to look in the mirror and see what you're creating. My situation was in creating relationships in which I was afraid to rely on someone else. So here's what that taught me. I had looked for people who were needy that wanted me to solve their problem. And I spent a lot of my own personal resources to do so, whether it was not just time, but sometimes I spent money to solve other people's problems, whereas I could have invested that in myself. And I learned that to a large extent. Number two, these same individuals that when I wanted to be comforted by them, they weren't necessarily available to the same extent. So I felt let down. And what it was this self-fulfilling prophecy that I could not find somebody who was reliable. You know, it all started with the choices that I was making. And when I really got to see that how I was choosing people or who I was choosing was the problem, it really changed my whole perspective about who was healthy for me to be around and who wasn't. And that took a lot of work in order to get that turned around. And as I see it now, I make much better choices as to who I consider my friends. And I make the distinction between friends and acquaintances. But people that I can rely on who are good people, and it's my time and their time were very warmly received. And when it comes to the issue of relationships, it's really important in learning to choose someone who really not only wants to be in the relationship, but really values you as a person. Because we do find people want to be paired up with someone. And obviously not just anyone will do, but I think having personal preferences and choices in this aspect, I've done several podcasts and I talk about how, choosing a partner and being very specific about your needs and wants and having lots of communication up front, how it takes away some of that mystery, so that when you get to this aspect of it, when you're problem solving, then you know that once you start solving problems together, you're building a relationship, and you learn as you're going what this person is capable of, what they like doing, how they solve problems. Some people are very calming when you're problem solving. Some people are very excitable when you're problem solving, and they tend to go into panic mode, and then you got to get some containment and bring them back in the room. Again, different styles. But when it comes to myself, I'm more attracted to a person who is much more calm and much more relaxed, and knowing that there is a reasonable solution, that we can solve that together, and it makes for a better outcome. And then we celebrate the fact that it's been handled. That's a good thing too. Remind yourself that when you're problem solving, it's not just about the problem, but it's about how you solve it, and give the appreciation to your partner for being a good partner through the situation, through the episode, through whatever you want to call it. Okay.
Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well, Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join Jordan, Keith, and Mariano as the trio dissects what's latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I am your host, John Johnson, and I am talking about bringing peace to your relationship. In this particular episode, one of the earlier parts of this podcast, I was talking about dealing with conflict and some of the ways in which to deal with that, some of the reasons conflict comes up, and the kind of people you have in your life, and how good it feels when you have somebody in your life that you can actually solve problems with and have a lot less drama. And I'm going to kind of broach onto another topic, and it's one of the do's and don'ts in relationships. And I've certainly been guilty of this because of my curious nature. And I was talking with a buddy of mine, and he'd kind of gone through a breakup. So obviously he was a little heartbroken about it. Not a little. I mean, he was definitely heartbroken about it. But in him sharing with me some of the problems that he and the girlfriend had, then I kind of looked at it and said, wow, I can see where some of the problems existed. And it wasn't just her, but he obviously contributed to it. And I'm going to share the problem, and then I'm going to relate to how I did it and the same thing in myself. I mean, it's full disclosure here. And clearly one of the things that he was dealing with is the now ex-girlfriend had some insecurity issues, many of which it seems like she had not really dealt with. And what tends to happen is, and I've said this, relationships give you an opportunity to deal with who you are. I mean, the you meaning the you, the it, the ego, and all of that stuff. Because if you haven't dealt with it before, it's going to come back around. And in this case, the girlfriend, the ex-girlfriend, had trust issues, And clearly there are things that are going to be red flags, and they're going to make people very concerned, very afraid. And when these kinds of things happen, you're going to get a reaction. And in this particular case, specifically what it came up, and he was honest about it. I mean, that wasn't a problem. He wasn't lying to her. But what happened is that they had met through an online dating situation. And one of the things that happened afterwards is he continued to look at other profiles while he was dating this particular girl. She found out about it, or however she found out about it. Yeah, she asked him, she confronted him about it, and he admitted that, yeah, I still look. And he didn't see anything wrong with it. Now, the issue of whether it was right or wrong, I don't cast judgment on that, because that's not what I'm about. What I'm about is really understanding what each person's position is. And as a podcast person, I can say, yeah, that works, or yeah, that doesn't work. And again, that may sound judgmental, but I'm just talking about the situation and how what the reaction is. And clearly that did not work. Having brought it to her situation, having this situation show up for her, obviously tapped on all of her insecurities about maybe him leaving, about maybe him having some girlfriend or something on the side, and that not being something that was that wasn't a thing for that relationship to be dealing with at that point in time, because I guess she thought that they were obviously a couple, and clearly they were living together. So they are a couple. The fact that he was looking online for things, I have to say that I got to throw a penalty flag on that, because while he didn't deny it, and he clearly had not made any communication, the fact that he was looking, this becomes one of those things about why are you looking online at other women when you have a girlfriend in your relation that you're living with, because there seems to be a disconnect. And if you're doing something that upsets your partner, then you got to look at, okay, what are you going to do to stop it? You can either agree to stop it, or if you don't, you know that the relationship's going to end. And ultimately, that relationship ended. And, he explained that to me. And I could understand his curiosity about just looking and searching. And for some people, it's probably no different than, he never did this when he was with her. He would never turn his head and look at another woman when they were together, because when they went out, they were together. But he kind of saw this as an extension that, hey, I'm just noticing other people. Well, to do it in that scenario, it obviously didn't work, and it probably would have been better that he stopped. Now, here is my own admission. I've done the same thing. And in talking about it, it really helped me to look at what I was doing and how uncomfortable that would make someone. Because when somebody that I was dating did the same thing, it bothered me. And I think it bothered me because I had made the effort to be in this relationship, and I felt that it was, I'm coming to deal with it, that it felt like it was a bit of a sacrifice. Okay, if I'm not going to look and have an online profile and look around, then I would feel that the person that I'm with is not out there trying to look for other dates to fill their time too. So from that aspect, I had to look at how I was behaving and then clean up my own behavior, because if it appeared that I had a double standard, then it would undermine the relationship that I had. And then it would also teach me that the person that I'm with maybe is not as committed to the relationship as I am. And having explained to you, my listener, the background that I've had in dealing with trust issues and solving other people's problems and not dealing with my own, it would certainly seem like I'm creating another situation like that. So I had to learn to be able to let go of people who did not want to see me as somebody that they valued enough to be able to put that aside. So that's my own background. That's my own story. And that was a hard thing to learn to do, because I was very committed to wanting to protect myself and protect my vulnerability. But know that if you do that to an extreme and you don't let somebody in, then what you wind up doing is you wind up pushing away the very people who might want to be involved and invested in your life. And that's something that I had to learn about. So having explained this to not only my friend, but I'm really mostly to myself to begin with, I realized the distinction that I needed to make. And it took a lot of thought and not trying to justify the old behavior. Because, again, when we're doing things that bring us pleasure and we only see it as something that helps us or something for our benefit, we can justify it all day long. And it's very easy to justify it. But when you have somebody else involved in your life, then you really have to begin to look beyond the just what's in front of you and think outside the box and think about how what you do affects someone else. That's what happens when you're in a relationship. And when you're able to do that, and you're effective in doing that, however many times you have to ask yourself that question, that's good. But when you're able to do that, then you've really moved beyond thinking about your own selfish needs and thinking about caring about another person. And you become very, very valuable, because that's what it's like when you're in a relationship. I'm John Johnson. This is Golden State Media Concepts, the Relationships Podcast, and I want to thank you for listening.